Today we're looking at some of the better value kits that Games Workshop sells, specifically going through every start collecting box and how good I think it is. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy focused 40k channel, where we're all about getting the most out of our miniatures on the tabletop, and we're also all about getting the most miniatures on the tabletop for the least money possible. Now, I made a previous version of this video in 8th edition, but I thought it was worth updating it to 9th, seeing as a lot of the boxes have changed, the prices for the miniatures when sold separately, and of course all points costs have changed going into 9th. Just as a general rule, miniature kits are fairly expensive from Games Workshop, so it's quite good to economise a little bit as and when you can. The start collecting boxes do generally give you decent discounts compared with buying the miniatures separately, but I don't believe they're all created equal, and some of them for some factions just are far more better than others, I think. If you are looking at getting one, then I'd remember that the only big savings really come if you actually wanted all of the models in the box, and not if you're just buying some of them as extra just because they happen to be in the box. In particular, things like characters can often be converted or found second hand for far cheaper than Games Workshop retails them, so I'd always weigh them up against buying something else for the same money. If you live in a place that has discount retailers, then start collecting boxes from them can be even better deals. If you're already getting a discount, then they can also get you something like 10 to 20% off depending on where you go. For example, Element Games, which I have a link to down in the video description that helps support the channel. If you are thinking about picking up any in the near future, then I'd certainly give them a thought if you're not thinking of buying from a local gaming store or something. In any case, in this video we're going to go through each and every start collecting box, look at its price, contents, how many points it would play in a game, the value saved compared with buying the kits separately, and a bit of general discussion about any of the miniatures or features of the box. Plenty to talk about here, so let's get started. First up, we have the standard Space Marines box set. This one's £55 or $90 and gets you a Terminator Captain, a Tactical Squad and a Venerable Dreadnought. It'll equate to around about 400 points in 9th edition, though this likely will go up a bit in the new codex, as we know that the Tactical Marines are going to 2 wounds each. Separately, they'd cost £82.50 or $138, saving you around about a third of the cost of that purchase, which seems to be fairly standard for the start collecting boxes in general. We are waiting for a new Space Marine Codex, and as we said, the Tactical Marines are looking like they're getting a decent buff. To be honest, all elements of the box could be decently better in the new book, but I would bear in mind that Games Workshop does seem to be rapidly going towards Primaris being the only way to collect Space Marines. Eventually these classic Star Marines will get phased out, though we're not sure what sort of timescale that might be, whether it could be at the start of 10th edition or maybe even the one after. In any case, a few core units, not necessarily the most strongest things in game ever, but it does get you an HQ, a troops and a walker. Next up, we have start collecting Vanguard Space Marines, which are basically the Phobos armoured troopers from the Shadow Spear box. This one's a little more expensive at £60 or $95, and it gets you a Phobos Lieutenant, Suppressors, 10 Infiltrators, and 3 Eliminators. In game, they're all pretty decently usable units, they all function well within the Space Marine army. The only one I'm not quite as sold on is perhaps that Phobos Lieutenant. It gets you a fair few more points than standard Codex Space Marines, around about 550 points. And if you were to buy them separately, then you'd be paying quite a lot for these. It'd be around about £115 or $195, though this is a bit of an estimate because of course you can't buy them all separately. This is the only way that you can buy Primaris Suppressors at the moment, and also this sculpt for the Phobos Lieutenant, I believe. However, comparing with roughly equivalent kits, it does give you a really massive discount, and if we're going with my rough estimate, then it saves you around about half the cost of the kits. One of the reasons that it saves you quite so much is that these are all monopose miniatures. Not really easy build, sorry, that's a bit of a typo there, but there's not really any customization on the models themselves, such as you don't have the option to give the Eliminators las fusils, for example. Despite this, I think that this is an absolutely excellent start collecting kit, and provided you're happy with the Phobos armor slightly stealthy type aesthetic, it's one of the best ways to get into Space Marines just from one box. Next up, we have start collecting Space Wolves. This one's a bit cheaper, only £50 or $85, so a bit cheaper than quite a lot of them. This one gets you a set of 3 Thunderwolves, one of the Space Marine Commander kits, which is quite multi-part and has quite a lot of power weapon options, and also a Space Wolf pack that you could use to build some Grey Hunters or Longfangs. This one's points will run you at around about 450 points, so actually in terms of money for the amount of points that you get on the board, it's really quite good. This again will also likely go up when the new codex is released and the Space Marines go to 2 wounds. It's a reasonably decent saving on the kit separately, around about 37% or £80 or $130. And if you are thinking about collecting Space Wolves, it does get you some of the most iconic units in Grey Hunters and those Thunderwolf Cavalry. and I'm a big fan of the Commander kit as well, just because you get so many options compared with other monopose characters. Again, like the standard Space Marine box set, there is this concern of the older style Marines getting phased out, though likely not for a while. And I would say again, it's not necessarily the most competitive box set ever. In the current rules at least, the Thunderwolf Cavalry are a little bit weaker than Wolfen, and Grey Hunters aren't some of the strongest troops, but again that might change. Overall though, not a bad introduction to Space Wolves. Space Wolf Space Marines are a little bit spoiled though, because they have two start collecting boxes, both the standard one and also this Primaris Space Wolf one, which is a bit different. This one's a bit more expensive at £60 or $95. It gets you 3 aggressors, 10 intercessors, a unique sculpt of a Primaris Wolfguard battle leader, and 2 sets of the Space Wolf upgrade kit. They'll be around about 410 points to field in game, so actually a bit less than the standard Space Wolf box. And if you do include the upgrade sprues in the price, then it would normally cost you £100 to buy all the contents of this box separately. If you're not so bothered about the upgrade sprues though, and you would be happy just to paint the models in the right colour scheme, it's not actually necessarily all that big a saving. It's around about 27% if you did discount the upgrade sprues. Still though, getting intercessors and aggressors, they're 2 absolutely core Space Marine units, and you could potentially just use this box to start a standard Space Marine army, as they're 2 incredibly useful units to have, and if you were thinking about buying them both anyway, then it wouldn't be bad to get the Space Wolf Lieutenant and the sprues included for free. You could potentially trade or swap them, and still potentially use the Space Wolf Battle Leader, provided you don't mind him looking a little bit wolfy. In game at the moment, all of these are decently strong core units for Space Marines, and overall I would say that this is a very good box to have access to. Next up we come to the Deathwatch, which is £60 or $95, and in this one you get 2 sets of the Kill Team box set, Watch Captain Artemis, one of the special characters, and a Venerable Dreadnought. It adds up to around about 460 points, and it costs you about £103 or $165 separately, so it's actually a very decent saving. Getting the 2 kill teams in the box is pretty excellent, as they are a core Deathwatch choice with loads of bits and special gear options. And if you were thinking about starting Deathwatch with 2 sets of these, then it's not a bad idea just to get this kit to get the special character and the Dreadnought for a very small price essentially. I'd say my only main caveat with this one is that Artemis is a little bit underwhelming as he stands in game, though with a bit of conversion work I'm sure you could use them as a Deathwatch captain if you really wanted to. The Venerable Dreadnought isn't necessarily quite as in line with what Deathwatch want to do normally, but could be a bit helpful for some anti-tank duty, which sometimes Deathwatch can struggle with. Overall though, a decent box and a good one to have access to. Next up we have Blood Angels, which is £60 or $95. This one gets you a Terminator captain with a Thunderhammer, a tactical squad and a Baal Predator. It costs you around 470 points in game depending on what gear you give them, and they give you a small saving at 30% as they cost around about £85 separately. Again, it's older style Marines but not Primaris, so I'd bear that in mind, but my main issue with the box is the fact that the units don't really gel incredibly well with Blood Angel's playstyle. They're typically all about jumping up and getting in your face, usually on the backs of jump packs and bearing chainswords, and tactical Marines just don't really want to do that most of the time, to be honest. The Baal Predator, while it has received a substantial boost in 9th, can still just be a little bit underwhelming as well. Overall, I would be a lot more sold on a Blood Angels box set if it came with something like Sanguinary Guard or Death Company in, which are more units that Blood Angels are likely to want to run. Next up we have the Astra Militarum start collecting. It's one of the slightly cheaper ones at £55 or $90. This one gets you a Cadian infantry squad, 1 heavy weapon team, a commissar and a Lehman Russ battle tank, and it's one of the slightly cheaper ones points wise, mainly because units in the guard do tend to be a bit cheaper points wise. It has fairly moderate savings at £80 or $130, around about 30% if we estimate the cost of the commissar, who I believe can only be got here or in the Scion start collecting set. You could potentially up the value of the box if you ran the Lehman Russ battle tank as a tank commander or knight commander PASC, which I think is pretty reasonable seeing as tank commanders are a fair bit better than standard Russes these days, and you could potentially use that commissar as a Lord Commissar. I bear in mind that the Lehman Russ doesn't have the Demolisher style options, so the Demolisher Cannon, Punisher Cannon and the Plasma Cannon. It just has the more standard variants, so it will depend on whether or not you want the standard Battle Cannon or something similar. The infantry sculpts are pretty old as well. Cadians are a little bit dated these days unfortunately, but I think that the utility of the units is quite good. Most guard kits are going to want to use some infantry and tanks in them, so you could just sort of see it as getting the tanks and infantry, and the commissar and the heavy weapon team are the added incentive. Overall decent but not absolutely outstanding. Next up we come to the Militarum Tempestus, if you wanted to play a Stormtrooper heavy army within the guard. This is £60 or $95, comes with that same commissar with the sword and the plasma pistol, 2 squads of Scions, and a Taurox Prime. Again, with guard units they're quite cheap, so it doesn't get you tons of points in game at 280, but the savings are a little bit better compared with the standard Astra Militarum box. You get £95 worth of kits in this. In general, I would strongly consider this if I was thinking about starting any sort of Scion army. You are likely to want multiple boxes of the Scion kit, and if you were thinking about buying them in multiple, it absolutely makes sense to get the Taurox and the Commissar for the small extra price that it would cost. The Commissar isn't necessarily the best fit with the units, seeing as Scions tend to operate quite independently and want to go their own way most of the time, and aren't really going to be failing leadership tests all that often to stand around getting blammed. I'd say that the units are moderately strong in game at the moment, but not absolutely outstanding. Scions are probably most powerful at the moment, jumping around to steal surprise objectives, but of course in 9th edition everything can change at each chapter approved or codex release. Overall, decent savings though, if you are going down a Scion heavy route for an Astra Militarum army. Next we come to the Adeptus Mechanicus. Theirs is a relatively recent start collecting box that was updated from the previous one that had the Honoured Runecrawler in it. It's £60 or $95, you get a Tech Priest Engine Seer, a kit of Skitarii that can either be Rangers or Vanguard, and you also get a Scorpius kit that can either be the Disintegrator or the Dune Rider. It's reasonable savings compared with buying them separately. You'd normally be paying £93 or $152 for these kits, but I think this perhaps says more about the fact that Adeptus Mechanicus are fairly expensive to collect as an army, as you don't really get all that many points for that price invested. If you can ever track down one of the previous start collecting boxes that hasn't gone away all that long ago, that arguably had a bit more value in it, depending on exactly what you wanted. The Dune Crawler is fairly equivocal to the Scorpius, but you did get a bigger, badder HQ in the Tech Priest Dominus rather than this Engine Seer. Otherwise though, they are all very solid usable units. Vanguard and Dune Riders are a pretty decent way to capture objectives, and Engine Seers can be useful at HQs that are cheap to bear warlord traits and things. Moving beyond the confines of the Imperium now, we come to the Chaos Space Marines. This one is basically the equivalent of the start collecting Vanguard Primaris Marines. It's the other half of the Shadow Sphere box. This one is honestly one of the best start collecting boxes there is. You get a Master of Possession, a Venom Crawler, 10 Chaos Space Marines, 2 Greater Possessed, and 2 Obliterators. A really decent number of models there, and also fairly big and important ones to boot. Bear in mind that these are all the monopose models again, which is part of the reason for why it's quite so cheap, but you do get 730 points of fairly recent Chaos sculpts, and via my very rough estimate of how much these kits would likely cost separately if you could buy them separately, you're potentially saving over half the box's content in terms of money. This box for starting Chaos is possibly one of Games Workshop's best deals across their entire range at the moment. You get a huge boost towards a Space Marine army from these, and the models inside are generally fairly usable as well, providing decent buffs or just being fairly strong in their own right. I'd possibly say that this is the very best of the start collecting boxes, and if you want to start Chaos then it's a really decent option. Next up we have Thousand Sons. This one's £60 or $95, and you get Ahriman, a set of Zangors, a set of Rubric Marines, and 2 copies of the Zangor upgrade kit, the one that can be used to give them auto pistols if you want to. You get round about 430 points in game, and if you include the cost of the Zangor upgrade kits, then you get around about £103 or $168. This one gets you a fairly decent saving. If you ignore the upgrade sprues, which I think aren't strictly necessary for the Zangors, then it's around about 32% savings. And they are some solid core units for the Thousand Sons, both their options for troops, and Ahriman, who is one of the strongest HQs for Thousand Sons right now. The Rubric Marines going to 2 wounds could make that side better, and if you do get multiple copies of the box, then you could potentially think about converting the duplicate Ahriman into another sorcerer on a disc. They're rarely that bad an option for Thousand Sons armies. The Zangors aren't super strong right now, but again with Games Workshop balance changes, who knows for the future. Next we have the 4 Chaos Demon box sets, which have a pretty decent advantage in being able to be used for 40k and Age of Sigmar. They're all £55 or $90, and we will have one for each of the different Chaos Gods. The Khorne one has a Skull Cannon, which can also be built as a Herald on a Blood Throne. It has 3 Blood Crushers and 10 Bloodletters. The savings are okay, around about 30%. Separately, the kits would cost £78 or $126, so not really one of the best to be honest. And currently Khorne armies aren't some of the strongest in the game. Chaos Demons didn't do very well out of their Psychic Awakening update. Having said that, Bloodletters and Blood Crushers are some of the core units for a Khorne Demons army, so if it is the way that you want to go, you do get important options from the Khorne Allegiance all in one box. Next up we have the Nurgle Daemons, which I think is a little bit stronger. It's the same price, but in this one you get 4 different units, a Poxbringer, 3 of the big plague drones on the flies, 3 sets of Nurglings, and a squad of Plague Bearers. Fairly similar points to the Khorne box at 350 this, but the savings are actually decently better. It'd cost £95 separately or $160, so over 40% savings, which is pretty good. They're all pretty solid units for a Nurgle Daemons army. In particular, Nurglings are excellent in the game at the moment due to being able to set up near the enemy deployment zone and harass them, and the Poxbringer has some really useful spells that can also be used to buff armies like Deathguard. Overall, a very solid box, and gets you a bunch of the core options for Nurgle Daemons. Next up we move on to Slaanesh, and this one has 2 of the chariot kits, which can be combined to an Exalted Seeker chariot. You also get 5 Seekers and 10 Demonettes. Unfortunately, this one doesn't have the best savings all in all. It's only £76 if you bought them all separately, so it's one of the smallest savings out of a start collecting box, and it also doesn't add up to very many points in game, just due to the units being fairly cheap. If you were set on getting all the units, it's not too bad, but it's not one of the strongest boxes out of this lineup, I'm afraid. Next we have the Demons of Zeentch, which I'm a fair bit more positive about. This one gets you a Burning Chariot, 3 Screamers, 3 Flamers, and 10 Horrors. The Burning Chariot kit also has a Herald if you build it as a Burning Chariot, so you can have a Herald on foot, and you have the option of building the Herald on the chariot or having him on foot alongside it, which can allow you to get quite a lot of points out of the box. This one giving you around about 430 points towards a Zeentch Demons army. The savings on getting the kits separately is decent, 41%, which is way above average, and this really does get you the majority of the options that Zeentch has access to within Chaos Demons all in one box. I really do like the inclusion of the Burning Chariot kit, as there's things that you can do with that to get different things out of it if you want to. You could have the Exalted Flamer on foot, and you could put the Herald on a disc if you wanted to, and potentially use the Screamers that come with the kit as more Screamers to fill out the squad. It is a very versatile one. Again, Zeentch Demons isn't exactly the strongest right now in game, and could use a bit of a boost from a 9th edition codex or points drops, but in terms of money invested for amount of plastic and points, this is one of the better kits, I think. Next up we move on to Xenos with the Craftworld Eldar, this one giving you a fairly unique take on the Craftworld Eldar, focusing on their Wraiths and Walkers. You get a kit of Wraith Guards or Wraith Blades, a Farseer, a Wraith Lord, and a War Walker. For the relatively cheap price, you do get quite a lot in terms of money saved and the amount of points on the field. In terms of percentages saved, it's actually the best one I think that has full multi-part kits in it, rather than the monopose ones from Chaos Space Marines and Vanguard Space Marines. In general, the units aren't too bad in game, though haven't done amazingly well from the transition from 8th to 9th, I think. It kind of depends whether you want to go down a Wraith and Walker heavy version for an Eldar list, when quite a lot of their options are a lot more mobile and zippy. If you are happy to go down that route though, then it's a very very good kit indeed. You get quite a lot of big models, decent savings, and a decent amount of points on the table. Next up we come to the Drukhari, again £55 or $90. You get a Venom, 3 Reaver jet bikes, 10 Witches and a Succubus. They're around 320 points depending on exactly what gear you give them, and they cost £85 separately, so around about an average savings of 36%. Much like the Craftworld box set, it's really going down one facet of the Drukhari army. It's pretty much a witch cult in one box, so decent savings if you prefer to have them over things like the Covens or the Cabals. Unfortunately, witches aren't the strongest in game right now. A lot of these units took very hefty points rises from 8th to 9th, so perhaps not the most helpful for more competitive Dark Eldar lists at the moment. Next up we have the Great Devourer in Tyranids, and their start collecting is £60 or $95. In this you get a Trigon or Morlock, a Broodlord, and 8 Genestealers. It's quite a decent saving on the kit separately, as these would cost £98, and you do get a saving of 39% on that, and a fairly respectable 420 points on the board if you use the Trigon as a Trigon Prime. Genestealers, while being some of the stronger units for Tyranids in 8th, did take a bit of a points hit as well in 9th, going up to 15 points, which hasn't helped them. But to be honest, I'd say the decision as to whether or not to buy this box is whether you really want the Trigon or Morlock kit. It does represent over half the value of the box, as it's £50 in itself. Basically, if you are thinking about buying a Trigon or Morlock, I'd strongly consider getting this box, and if you're not really that fussed about it, I'd think about just getting other units. Next for their disciples, we have the Genestealer Cults, a comparatively recent start collecting kit that would cost you £60 or $95. In this one you get an Acolyte Icon Ward, a set of the Acolytes, 5 of them, a squad of 10 Neophytes, and an Achilles Ridge Runner, which is quite a recent kit. Again, much like Guard, many of their units are really quite cheap to field in game. so they are one of the lowest in terms of the amounts of points that you'd get out of the box, at only around about 250, depending on exactly how many fancy rock saws you give those acolytes. Provided you did want the units included though, this would be a decent saving. It's around about 39%, as they would cost £98 separately. Neophytes and acolytes are going to be core choices in pretty much every Genestealer Cult army, so it's good to have more of them. And it's worth noting that the sculpts for the miniatures are pretty recent, and they're very nice and modern compared with many of the other kits here. Gameplay wise, Genestealer Cult aren't exactly the strongest in 9th edition right now, but it has to be said that they're a very interesting army to play, with a very different playstyle to most. Next we come to the Start Collecting Orcs box, for £55 or $90, in which you get a Pain Boy, a Death Dread, 5 Knobs and 11 Orc Boys. You get a decent amount of points at 350, and decent savings of 41%, a fair bit above average that one, as they cost £92 separately. If you're looking to get into Orcs, then it's really not a bad box set to be honest. You're generally going to want at least some boys in the army all the time. Pain Boys are a really quite solid buffing character, and they were one of the few Orc units not to get hit at all in the points change to 9th edition. And Death Dreads are pretty decent now, with the option of some powerful custom jobs to make them a bit more killy or survivable in game. The squad of Knobs is maybe not quite so good in game right now, and Games Workshop does seem to like to throw them into pretty much every single discount Orcs bundle. They are pretty cool fun models though, with a fair amount of customization type parts that could be pretty useful as spares. Overall, a fairly solid box I think. Finally we come to Tau Empire. This one's £60 or $95. You get an Ethereal on a hover drone, 3 battle suits, 10 fire warriors, and within the kit you also get 8 drones. Their points cost will vary greatly depending on exactly how much gear you give those battle suits, as you can really dial them up to the nines with lots of fancy toys, but with a fair few decent guns you get around about 450 points. The savings are pretty reasonable, around about 35%. It's the only way to get this particular Ethereal on the hover drone, and fire warriors, battle suits and drones are all really usable units for the Tau, and I don't think that you're going to have many situations where you're not using parts of this box. One thing that you could potentially think about to get a bit more value out of it is to use one of the Tau battle suits as a commander battle suit, which could be a way to squeeze just a little bit more value out of it. Overall though, very solid, and could certainly provide some solid reinforcements when starting Tau. So I hope you've enjoyed that little rundown of the Start Collecting boxes that are currently available for Warhammer 40k. If I had to commit to which ones I think are the best, I would go with the Chaos Space Marine one first, followed up closely by the Vanguard Space Marine one, just because you get so many points and so many recent sculpts for such a low price, with some honourable shout-outs for Orcs, Tau, Zeentch Demons, Nurgle Daemons and Craftworld Eldar. If you have any other thoughts on the boxes, or tips for getting more use out of them, then feel free to write anything in comments down below. It will certainly be interesting to read them. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to the channel for plenty of regular 40k tactics content, and also thoughts and discussion as to buying 40k in videos like this. If you have got any good value out of this video or any of my others, I'd just like to mention that I have a Patreon page, which again is down in the video description, along with the Element Games affiliate link. All these videos do take quite a long time to make, so if you would like to be part of keeping them coming, then the Patreon link is down below. Channel patrons get to see one video early each week. There's regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel. There's also the chance to participate in regular prize draws, where I give away some big kits on a monthly basis. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support the channel, then feel free to have a look down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.